It's great to be here. Thanks everyone for coming. Really excited for this conversation. As everyone here knows, the world is going crazy about AI. It's the topic of discussion in every boardroom, in every strategic conversation. And so luckily for you all, we have three absolute world experts in the field of AI here on the panel, spanning academia, research, startups, large companies. So a ton of collective wisdom here. And I'm really excited to hear from our panelists. So let me very quickly introduce myself. My name is Rob Toews. I'm a partner at Radical Ventures. Radical is a VC firm totally focused on AI. We're now investing out of our third fund with an exclusive focus on AI startups. And let me hand it over to each of the three panelists to maybe take a minute or two to introduce yourself and tell the crowd a little bit more about what you're working on and what you're focused on now. And we can just go down the line and start with you, Andrew.
Sure, thanks, Rob. Hey, everyone. I'm Andrew Ng, and I lead AI Fund, which is a venture studio that builds AI startups. So I started AI Fund about 5 years ago when I realized that AI as a general purpose technology is not useful just for one thing. So when I led AI team at Google, I was building things for Google, but realized that as a general purpose technology, it's not just good for online advertising, it's good for everything, a lot of things under the sun, from maritime shipping to education, to healthcare, to ed tech, and so on. And that the most efficient way to execute a lot of these different projects was to build a lot of the different companies to go after these opportunities. So AI Fund is a venture studio. We build one company a month, and then we invest in them.
Amazing. My name is May Habib. I am the co-founder and CEO of Writer, which is an enterprise generative AI platform based in San Francisco. We've been in ML and NLP for 10 years. Our core team at Writer, our first company, was in the machine translation space. We saw the transformer and couldn't really unsee it, and started Writer 3 years ago. So before it was the topic of mainstream conversation, which means we've learned a lot with our enterprise customers. And Writer is a full stack generative AI platform. So we build an open source family of large language models, and on top, we've built an application layer that creates custom applications for customers. So what makes LLMs really powerful inside of companies is actually when you marry them with data and specific use cases, and we make it really easy for customers to do that. Some of our largest customers are Uber, United Healthcare, Accenture, Intuit, and it's been amazing to see just a huge explosion of interest in this space since.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I'm Ivan, co-founder of Cohere. We've been building generative foundational models for almost half a decade now. So it's been pretty amazing to see all the progress and all the proliferation. I've been doing it with my co-founders, Nick and Aidan. Aidan was one of the co-authors of the Transformer paper, which is the T in GPT. Our models are pretty good. They're the best. They score the best on the Stanford Helm benchmark, and we have some of the best search models in the world. Our philosophy to serving our customers is actually we bring our models to where the customers are, and respect their data privacy, all the data sovereignty problems. So yeah, we serve the enterprise, and we see a lot of potential in this space.
That's great. Thanks to all three of you for those introductions. I want to start with a big picture question I'm curious to hear all three of your thoughts on, which is what is something that you believe strongly about the field of AI today, or that you think is really important that most people would disagree with you on? And let me start with you, Andrew.
Sure. So one thing that I think is many AI insiders will believe, but people not in AI won't see nearly as clearly, is the power of large language models as a developer tool as opposed to as a consumer tool. Hopefully all of you have tried out ChatGPT. If you have not, recommend you go try it out, or Bard or Bing text search. But I think that even though large language models like ChatGPT as a consumer web UI tool is well understood, I see we're at the beginnings of a major revolution in how AI applications are developed using large language models and prompting. In fact, Ivan's company is a part of this as well, providing these capabilities. And this is taking machine learning systems that used to take like a year to build, is now possible to build and get them deployed maybe in hours, maybe even faster. And there's a massive wave of innovation in how AI applications will be built that I don't think the world has really fully appreciated is coming yet.
That's a great answer. What do you think, May?
I think AI is going to make our lives a lot better than it is getting credit for right now. You think about just how much of our lives is offloaded to technology today. You land in a city you don't know anyone's phone number in the whole world. You get into a car driven by somebody you don't know. They don't know where they're taking you, but they get you there. I think AI is going to do very similar things in retrospect to our workday, actually. I think there is not as much creative and enterprising work that we actually get done in a day as I think is possible. And AI is going to help us see that and extend that.
Yep. Ivan?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a particularly controversial take in this room, but I feel like there's this growing sentiment that open source models will be better than GPT-4 or something like that. I actually think the models will only get bigger from this point onwards. Yes, small models are certainly capable for some simpler use cases, right? There are smaller networks, less parameters that actually represent simple functions. But as this technology proliferates and consumers demand more and more capabilities out of these systems, we're going to need to train larger and larger models. So I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet in terms of what the upper bound parameter size could be for these foundational models.
Yeah, really interesting point. And I think it will be worth us spending a little bit of time later in the conversation talking about open source models and big versus small models. I think that these are really interesting dynamics that are unfolding in real time in the world of AI. Next question that I also want to get all three of your thoughts on. A lot of the folks in the room here are capital allocators, investors across different asset classes. I think the question that many investors around the world are grappling with right now in this current AI transformative era is, where do we think the value will accrue? And where are the smartest places to deploy capital into? And there are different mental models or frameworks you can use to kind of divide up the AI landscape. But roughly, I think you can think about the hardware layer with silicon. You can think about the model layer or the infrastructure layer, which includes tools. And then, of course, the application layer. And so I'm curious to hear all three of your thoughts. Maybe, Ivan, we can start with you this time. Where would you advise folks in the room in terms of where you think the most value will accrue?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think there's probably going to be a couple of foundational model providers just because of how much initial capital there requires to actually train these large models, get them good data, find compute to actually run these things. But I think most of the value will be captured on the application layer. That's where the rubber meets the road with this technology, where a human actually will get value from these systems. So quite honestly, most value will be in the application layer. Yeah.
What do you think, May?
I think it depends on what class you have access to. But if you think about the entire LLM landscape as hardware, cloud, right, compute, then open source models, closed source models, picks and shovels and tooling to use the open source models, and then application layer. They're all at very different stages of maturity. So if you're interested in apps and picks and shovels, you get into these two funds. If you're interested in cloud and hardware, you buy NVIDIA and Google and Microsoft. And then in closed and open foundation models, it really is very much an open question. We are a full stack platform, so we combine the model layer with the application layer, and it's a family of open source models. And so our bet is that the reason companies want the model, whether open source or closed, is they want the application, and they want the application because they want the business impact and the competitive advantage. And so we kind of close that circle by giving them something that'll get them very fast time to value, but the code is inspectable, they can append data to it, they can audit and augment it as they like. And so it certainly isn't going to be, I think, a winner-take-all market in the application layer, not by a long shot. And in 10 years, in aggregate, if I had to bet on it, it would probably be hardware and cloud together, and application on the other end.
Yeah, so where to allocate the dollars? This is something we're chatting a little bit backstage, so we're all giving somewhat related answers. I think it's because I was surprised, we're actually all pretty aligned about the promise of the application layer. So just to flesh out the landscape a little bit more, as Rob and May were saying, hardware layer, NVIDIA, Intel, AMD, probably they have a meaningful role to play, maybe others as well. But we don't play that. It's a tough place, but I think there'll be value. The infrastructure, picks and shovels, the clouds have an important role to play. There will be new AI tooling, some of which would be very profitable. And then on the flip side, when I look at the pricing that Google just announced, kind of Google I/O last week, some of these is just so low cost, it's hyper competitive at this point, and a lot of the infrastructure layer with OpenAI, Google, Amazon Bedrock, AWS Bedrock, and so on. So some of the infrastructure layer feels very competitive, but I think there will be winners there as well. And the space that you heard Ivan say at the start, and that I fully agree with, is massive value to be mined. Wide open spaces is the application layer. And let me share why. So it turns out that AI is a general purpose technology, is being applied and needs to be applied to all sorts of places. Over the last decade, when deep learning, AI started to work really well, many of us collectively started building out many use cases. Recently, generative AI started to work really well. So there's another major tool in our collective toolbox where we now need to go and figure out the concrete use cases to apply to all corners of the economy. AI Fund, we worked on a company on maritime shipping, that is making boats, large shipping things, maybe about 10% more fuel efficient. And I'm an AI technologist. Like, what do I know about shipping, right? I've been on a boat, but I really know almost nothing about shipping. And so when we work on things like that, we work with subject matter experts, but the competitive dynamics I see is very few people in AI are working on shipping. A couple of weeks ago, we launched a startup on AI ship and relationship coaching, kind of romance. The CEO that worked with us is Renate Nyborg, who was the former CEO of Tinder, so deep experts in relationships and romance. And again, from an AI technologist point of view, I'm an AI person. What do I know about romance? And ask my wife. My wife will verify that I know nothing about romance. But that's why in the competitive dynamics of AI applied to romance, it just doesn't feel nearly as competitive. And so all corners of the economy, all of these application sectors, probably ones where many of you have assets as well, are often ripe for AI to enter and make a huge difference. And it just doesn't feel that competitive despite the massive size of the opportunity. So that's why I think massive value will be created over the next decade, the application layer. But the rub of it is, it's still a lot of work for people like AI Fund or you or all of us to work with subject matter experts to figure out what are the valuable use cases and go and execute on them. And I expect it to be a many years journey to go and figure those out and build them.
It's fascinating to hear the enthusiasm from all three of you for the application layer. I think especially given that to this point in the kind of AI craze and investment cycle, most of the dollars have flowed to the model layer and to companies companies like OpenAI most notably, and competitors that are building the models. But I think this is a really important and interesting and fundamental insight that at the end of the day, the opportunities at the application layer are literally infinite across every single industry you can think of, and that's very greenfield today. Those opportunities have just begun to be tapped. On that note, Andrew, I'm curious, great examples that you provided from AI Fund, I think, that help illustrate the breadth of these opportunities from maritime to dating/romance. Curious to hear more about your guys' current plans for AI Fund.
So my what plans?
The current plans for AI Fund.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we've been operating for a few years, and I think that the opportunity set feels like it was exploding. There was deep learning, supervised learning from a few years ago, generative AI now. So I think over the years, we've refined our process for building companies significantly. So in Fund 1, we committed to our LPs to build 40 companies, but as an engine for building companies, gets even more efficient, we now think it's feasible to build 60 companies per fund, which is why we actually are at a pace of building and launching and investing in one company per month. And it's very exciting to see all these ideas work with subject matter experts and quickly validate the ideas, hire a technical team, bring in a founder, invest in the company, and then often create really exciting and meaningful businesses. And we're very focused at the application layer, and we play just a little bit at the infrastructure layer, but very carefully because it feels quite competitive there.
That's great. One topic that's come up now a couple times in this discussion that I think is worth us digging into a little bit more is this topic of open source models versus closed models. And just to provide a little bit of context, in the first wave of the generative AI boom, the best performing models and the most well-known models have been proprietary models from closed source companies, most notably OpenAI with GPT-3, GPT-4, Cohere, companies like Anthropic that are building these massive models and then making them available via API for customers, but not open sourcing them to the world. But just in the past couple months, there has been tremendous momentum behind open source models, in some cases where the weights are freely available, they're available for commercial use under commercial license, and anyone can go online and download them and work with them. And the performance is not at the level of OpenAI's or Cohere's models, but the gap seems to be shrinking in some cases. So I'm curious to hear, maybe both May and Ivan, interested to hear your perspectives as two founders of companies that are building their own models, how you guys see that competitive landscape playing out and what you think the dynamic will be and the roles between closed models and open source models. May, we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Because we start workflow and use case backward, almost always the POC and the benchmark for possibility is set by whatever big model people have access to, the biggest possible. But then the actual productionized use case is the smallest possible thing that gets the job done. It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be faster. And so for consumer use cases, I agree with Ivan that it's going to be a race to, a continued race to bigger and bigger models that solve more and more things for consumers and their rising expectations. But in the enterprise, a business isn't going to actually need a Bloomberg chat, right? You're going to need a bunch of smaller models that are solving much more specific tasks. I think people will have their own LLM for code completion within their own code base. They will have separate LLMs across clinical operations, separate from brand and marketing. It will be a world of smaller models that are invariably going to be built on open source, whether it's folks doing it soup to nuts themselves or using a vendor like Writer to do it. The kind of POC and sandbox land where folks are playing with APIs, whether they're from OpenAI or Microsoft, they're spending more money having engineers write sonnets with GPT-4 than they would actually getting smaller models into production, solving real business cases. So when it gets real, the only answer is open source. I'm so dogmatic on this.
Really interesting and helpful perspective, May. Ivan, what do you think? Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. I feel like, while it's very impressive what open source has accomplished, Llama and the derivative models from that, I truly do believe consumers' expectations and consumers and enterprises' expectations for the capabilities of what these models can do will outpace the progress open source will make. I think a lot of people relate these dynamics back to open source software, but fundamentally these systems are much more difficult to contribute to and to volunteer to contribute to than software is. Not only do you need the talent to write code to train these models, you also need data. You also need compute to run these systems to train them. So I think it's a much more difficult task to have, like a Linux sort of effect in this technology space. So I'm not particularly optimistic about the productionization of open source models for a very long time. And for Cohere, actually, a lot of times, open source models serve as an on-ramp to using Cohere systems. They try using open source model. It's not quite there, but they see the potential of this tech, and then they call the professionals, which is us, to actually get these systems to use our models to do exactly what they want to do. So I feel like, yes, the open source models will get better, but the demand, the expectations of buyers will outpace the progress that's being made there.
Yeah, really interesting point, Ivan. And I think it's a great an open question, can open source models ever be as high performing and keep up with closed source, or will there always be this lag? And I think regardless of the specific dynamics, I think it's probably fair to say everyone here would agree that looking forward, like both closed source models and open source models are going to be a very important part of the ecosystem. They will both play their roles, and like neither one will totally dominate, but that dynamic and that tension I think will be a really key one to keep track of. Another topic that I think will be of great interest to the audience here, and that all three of you have a lot of experience in as folks who are building startups and selling into companies, is around AI adoption in the enterprise. So I'm curious to hear from all three of you, and we can start with you, Andrew. How much and to what extent is AI and specifically generative AI and large language models actually being adopted in the enterprise today? And what are some of the biggest barriers to accelerating that adoption?
Boy, I think many large enterprises are adopting AI. Actually, to me, this is what I think is the biggest problem with more widespread AI adoption. We talk about AI for 10, 15 years. And in fact, if you look at the large consumer internet companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, they're fantastic at using AI. And I think in AI, we have figured out the recipe for how to hire 100 engineers to build one piece of software, say something to serve ads to a billion users and generate massive revenue. So that recipe for building one AI piece of software in consumer internet, generate massive revenue, that works. We know how to do that. But when I look at other industries, for example, real examples disguised a little bit for anonymity, works with pizza makers. They are taking pictures of the pizza to make sure the cheese is spread evenly. That's like a $5 million project, but for a $5 million project, you can't hire dozens of highly paid AI engineers. Or wheat harvesting, work on an agriculture company, the wheat's already farmed, the wheat's already grown in on the field. If you can use AI to tune how high the harvesting arm is based on rain and what the wheat's bent over, you get more wheat out of the field, more food for the farmer to sell, more money for the farmer, better for the environment, another $5 million project. So how can you get these projects executed on? So in AI, we've been good for a while now. If you look at there's a long tail distribution of AI projects in the value. We've been good at executing the $100 million, $1 billion, even hundreds of billions of dollars projects. But from where I'm sitting, I see tens of thousands of, say, $5 million projects that the AI world has not been good at executing on. Another wave that I think is coming, partly because of companies like May and Ivan's, but I don't think is here yet, is low-code, maybe no-code tools, as well as interfaces based on prompting that make it much easier to build applications that go into this long tail of the tens of thousands of $5 billion use cases that have not yet been executed successfully. So I'm actually excited about that development, looking out a little bit into the future.
Yeah, I love that, Andrew. I think there are three kind of big buckets that we see as barriers. One is around data readiness. And so if you think about whether you are building knowledge graphs or embeddings or custom models or finely tuned mini models, having access to data that is clean, that is ready, that really encompasses the breadth of what you're trying to do. We're finding enterprises really struggle actually with coming up with data that they think is good enough, clean enough, broad enough to do the kinds of things that they want to do. The second bit is this disconnect between the CIO organization that is driving a lot of the experimentation and then the rest of the business that is clamoring for generative AI use cases. And the most powerful use cases being across operations or HR or marketing and branding, where the CIO's organization hasn't historically had very close ties to really understanding those workflows and those use cases. And then lastly, I think it is around just AI literacy and just end user and end knowledge worker type of adoption. We are essentially giving everybody a chief of staff and a intern, right? With a lot of these tools from from just a sheer power perspective. A lot of what you talked about, Andrew, right, in terms of just the natural language interfaces, like that exists already. If we didn't innovate at all for another 10 years, it would still take at least that long to get to like your median kind of employee and their natural uptake to using these tools for leverage. And so kind of that AI literacy and end user training we're definitely seeing. There are folks who naturally lean into the experimentation, and we definitely advise the executives that we work with to promote those people, showcase those people, have them show off the things that they've built with the tooling to the rest of the organization to inspire them. But that this is definitely going to be a lot of change management work that companies are going to be doing for the next decade.
Yeah, really great points about the delta between having built the technology and actually integrating it in a deep way into enterprises. Ivan, what are your thoughts in terms of enterprise adoption of AI?
Yeah, I think I mean, quite honestly, like the supply is so constrained. The demand far outpaces the supply. You know, and this is due to many factors, right? Like, we really see it at Cohere from two fronts. Like one, the chat assistant use case where all your employees could get 40 to 50% productivity gain just from talking to this really intelligent enterprise agent. And the other case is, you know, building features for your users. And I think everyone that we're talking to can see the first case, which is, you know, at the worst, at the lowest bar for your AI adoption is that you can make your workforce way more productive. And everyone is seeing that. Everyone wants this thing. But there's so many factors that's adding friction to the adoption for this point. One is, you know, you don't want your employees sending sensitive data to external parties like Cohere or OpenAI. So you want a private solution where, you know, you can actually look up, you feed it your entire enterprise knowledge base to be an assistant to your employees' day-to-day work. And so we're building something like this for, you know, our users on SageMaker, Azure, GCP, but it is like a heavily supply-constrained problem where there's so many enterprises that want this for their workforce, and they're thinking, oh, if our competitor has this, you know, how do we compete with our competitor who's now 50% more productive, right? I think that survival instinct is actually playing out in the market, and that's why everyone's clamoring for this technology. And how I see it play out in the next, you know, 3 to 4 years, I think every enterprise will have their own private instance of this agent, whether to power their, you know, user-facing features or to actually help their employees do the work better. And the, you know, competitive edge will be in how they actually train this agent for their enterprise, using their own internal data, their own internal, you know, employee workforce as the competitive moat. Everyone's agent will be slightly different, right? So I think that's where I see things go.
Yep, thanks, Ivan. One topic that I think is important for us to spend a bit of time on, I know all three of you have thought deeply about this and have really interesting perspectives. AI, as we all agree, incredibly powerful tool with the potential to drive tremendous value creation and benefit to humanity. But there are also risks and downsides to the technology. There's been an increased amount of discussion recently around the risks of job displacement and job loss, bias in AI, misinformation, and deep fakes, and concerns around the proliferation of that using generative AI, even questions that some luminary AI figures have brought up around the potential existential risk to humanity that a very super powerful AI might pose. So I'm curious to hear from each of you briefly, what is the one risk or danger of AI that you think is the gravest and is the one that everyone in the room should be taking most seriously? And Andrew, we can start with you.
Boy, let me just say, so I think there are real risks of AI, as Rob was saying. I think bias, fairness, concentration of power, toxic speech amplifying, those are real risks, job displacements. We should take those seriously. AI people do take it seriously and working hard on it. Let me just add just the existential risk.
Yeah.
I'm actually honestly much less worried about that for two reasons. One, the hard takeoff scenario for AI, where AI kind of isn't working today, but suddenly overnight, maybe May 31st, 2023, suddenly a super intelligence, sentience takes over the world. Technology doesn't develop like that. It develops slowly, quickly, but slowly. And second, humanity has lots of experience managing entities much more powerful than any single human. Corporations and nation states are far more powerful than any single human, but society has kind of managed to steer them on average, to do much more good for humanity than harm. And so with AI developing toward AGI, which I hope we'll get to in the next few decades maybe, we'll see it coming, and with plenty of experience steering these technologies. And if you do look at the actual existential risk to humanity, maybe an asteroid striking the planet, or maybe the next pandemic, fingers crossed, or maybe climate change causing massive depopulation and society kind of falling apart. I think, human civilization maybe does have some very low probability existential risk. I think that if we're to address them, AI will be a major piece of the solution. So if you want humanity to survive and thrive for the next 1,000 years, I think we should build AI quickly rather than make it go any slower, because I think AI will help us to survive and thrive for the next 1,000 years.
That's a really interesting point, Andrew. Yeah, this is a topic that is inspiring a lot of active debate and discussion, and seeming more serious folks in AI seem to be treating the possibility more seriously. But on the other hand, as you point out, there are a lot of reasons to be skeptical of it. And I think it's a great point that to go a step further, a lot of existential risks that humanity might face, like climate change and others, AI is actually one of the best tools that we have to address those risks. So that's a great point. I know we only have a little bit of time left, but May and Ivan, I'm curious to hear. Maybe Ivan, I'll start with you, and then May, we'll give you the last word, because I know you have thoughts on this topic of AI risks as well. I'm curious to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. I mean, there are very real short-term risks I see with AI, and that's with job displacement, right? Not even just the fully autonomous agent replacing people, but what happens when your human becomes 100x more productive? How will capital allocators look at moving their money around if their workers are 100x more productive in a recession, right? I think those are very real risks, and it could lead to potentially very unhappy people, and policymakers might overreact and impose some sort of regulation in response that actually stifles the progress of AI, and we might fail to capture the upsides. So I think we should take this job displacement thing very seriously. It's real. Yeah.
Agree with both. A final maybe additive thing would be, I would like to see a Manhattan Project-esque type of initiative around bias. Give us that versus regulation any day. Like, that is definitely going to be way more effective, just giving these incredible AI ethics and bias researchers a lot more resources to do work that benefits everybody and makes these models much fairer in society. But I agree, AI is much more likely to help us avoid existential risk than bring it on.
Really great perspectives. There's so much more we could talk about. We're out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much to these three wonderful panelists for joining us.
Thank you.